Heliopolis, which means the city of the sun. Flanking this temple was two great Tekhen, or two great Tekhens. One now we have in Central Park, and the other we have on the Thames River in London. They were also referred to as Cleopatra's Needle, because Cleopatra took him from this temple and she brought him to Alexandria, her capital. When we talk about building and architecture, you cannot build without Ma'at. Ma'at is the foundation. It's that which all things stand upon. The very universe is placed together or is kept in place by Ma'at. Now some people say, well, what is Ma'at? What is it? It's an abstract concept. What does it represent? Ma'at is truth. Ma'at is righteousness. Ma'at is reciprocity. Ma'at is justice. Ma'at is the law. Ma'at is the law. It's not only the law of the land, but Ma'at is the law of the universe. There is no said temple for Ma'at in ancient Kemet because Ma'at was a part of all construction. Before you build, you had to lay the foundation. Before we build today, we have to lay a foundation. We still build with Ma'at. The Tekhens themselves, the base of the Tekhens, or the obelisk, before they were erected on the foundation. That foundation is Ma'at. One of the great tombs in ancient Kemet, is one of my particular favorites, is the tomb of Khnum-Hotep. We see the migration of Asiatics into the Nile Delta. The Kemetu later referred to him as the Haiku. This word has been today translated as Hyksos. These people established themselves in the Nile Delta during the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. As time progressed, the Middle Kingdom declined. With the fall of the Middle Kingdom, they were able to assert themselves during the Second Intermediate Period. So during the Second Intermediate Period, the Hyksos established a power base in the Delta. They built a palatial forest in a place called the Varas. And in close excavation work today, we see that these structures, or these buildings, or these burials were not Egyptian in origin. However, they were Semitic. They were Canaanite. These people were immigrants. They were migrants, or they migrated into the Nile and established themselves. You look at some of their names, see that their names are Semitic in origin. Now, we do know that a battle took place with people from Waset. And when we go to the Cairo Museum, we see the mummy of Sekhen Ra-Ta. We see how he was killed in battle. You can actually even see the scar on his head where he was killed by the axe of the Hyksos. He died in battle. His first son, Kamoza, took up the fight. He also died in battle. His second son, Amoza, continued to battle and eventually was able to destroy the Hyksos. Here's the beginning of the new kingdom. Now this new attitude comes out because it's a new attitude, it's a new saying that goes along with it. Never again. Never again will they allow this to happen. Never again will they allow outsiders to come into the Nile and rule them. It was an insult to them. It was a total disruption to Ma'at. It was a disruption to their way of life. So now you see the emergence of standing armies. Now you see the importance of standing armies. Now you see the great warrior kings as referred to. Now you see them not only defending their borders, but also having these great battles outside of their borders. We spoke about the Battle of Armageddon. We know that Jehotimes III, or referred to as Thutmose III, had the great battle on the plain of Megiddo, which is the origin for the word Mageddon. This Megiddo is where he fought the Canaanites in a great battle. He is also referred to as the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. That should be reversed, however. Napoleon should be referred to as the Thutmose III of France, because obviously one precedes the other, by thousands of years. So that's a little backwards. We need to change that around. But you see again the new attitude that comes about. These people were not enslavers. These people wanted to live their lives peacefully. However, they were not able to live their lives peacefully because there was other people around the world that began to emerge and begin to impose their will, impose their ways on ancient Kemet. So you understand this about pyramid building during the Old Kingdom. Let's go back to the 3rd and 4th dynasty. Let's look at the world and how the world looks at the time. We look at the 3rd and 4th dynasties, 2400 BC. Historically, what other nations are in the world at this time in terms of an established nation? Assyria is way down the road. Babylon, thousands of years away. Persia, thousands of years away. Greece and Rome, thousands of years away. They're able to build. They're able to live a life uninterrupted because there was no invaders. And there were small pockets of people. So now, let's fast forward 1,000 years to 1500 BC. Now Asia begins to evolve. The Hittites become a nation now. Assyria is right down the road. You have to have a standing army to defend yourself. Now you're not alone any longer. There are other people on the earth vying for power. And we look at power, it's all relative. So these other nations are getting stronger. So now we have to adopt an army. We have to set up a draft and create this standing army of people. We look at Ramses II and his great battle with the Hittites in a place called Kadesh. It gives us an example of just how vast the Kemetic Empire was at that time. Kadesh is a city in Asia Minor, just south of Turkey. We understand that this land belonged to Kemet. It belonged to Kemet at this time. Why? Why did they have to assert themselves so far north? What was that far north that they needed? We know that Kadesh was a great trade outpost. Kadesh was the trade outpost of the Mediterranean, not necessarily the Mediterranean world, but the northern Mediterranean world. It's the tip of the Mediterranean, going into the Asia Minor area, going into Persia, the crossroads, up into Europe. Economically, this place was very important to the ancient Kemetiu. They had a hold on it up until the end of the 18th dynasty. The end of the 18th dynasty saw the decline in the Kemetic influence on the Asiatic world. The beginning of the 19th dynasty saw a reemergence of Kemetic influence as an attempt to try to gain control of this area or this territory that they lost with the decline of the 18th dynasty. Ramses I, who was a great warrior king, succeeded by his son, Seti I, who was the father of Ramses II. Now see, Ramses II, who most scholars look at as probably the pharaoh of the Exodus, we have to look very closely at this because historically we know that Ramses fought a great battle with Mutawalis, the king of the Hittites. They fought to a stalemate. That stalemate battle made it necessary for them to sign a peace treaty. This peace treaty, or replica of it, is now on display in the United Nations as a symbol of the world, to the world, of what two great nations can do in terms of forging a peace treaty. And it was very simple. They decided that they would be allies with one another, and that any nation that would rise against them, the other would help them in battle. But this gives us geographically an area of land to which the Kemetiu would have had, which would have been a part of ancient Kemet, which would have went from the bowels of Nubia as far north as Kadesh. Amenhotep IV, who changed his name to Akhenaten, built a city to the north of Waset, or Thebes, as the Greeks called it, in a place called the Akhet Aten, the horizon of the Aten. The Aten represents the physical sun. The Akhet represents the horizon, which could be a mountain range. In his city, he established a new way of thinking, a new way of doing things. He no longer allowed the Kemetic people to strive to understand the principles of life or the principles of the universe. He closed the temples and he ordained the worship of one particular deity, which is the Aten, which is the physical sun. Some people say that the ancient Egyptians worshiped the sun. They never worshiped the sun. Ra is not the sun. The sun symbolizes Ra, but Ra is not the sun. Ra represents the life itself. Life as we know it, that's Ra. And it's symbolized by the sun because the sun is connected to life. However, during this period of time, the worship of the Aten, or the understanding or the striving to understand the sun, is the Aten, as they saw as a giver of life. There were several letters, as we refer to today as the Amarna letters, that were found in this city, Akhenaten, which is today referred to as Tel Amarna. These Amarna letters are letters from various rulers or provinces of ancient Kemet in Asia. Some of them was as simple as saying, "Great king, please send help. We're being invaded." These are things that he ignored. He ignored these things. He refused to send standing armies to defend his outposts in these other places. He felt it was not important. His desire or his design was just to stay in the city and become more spiritually connected to what he felt was the creator. Not understanding that what he was doing set the stage for the decline of ancient Kemet. Because if you don't assert yourself, now your enemies grow stronger and you grow weaker. So now towards the end of the 18th dynasty, Kemet loses control of Kadesh. They lose control of this valuable trading outpost, of this crossroads to the rest of the world. Seti and Ramses and the pharaohs or the rulers towards the end of the 18th dynasty and the beginning of the 19th dynasty tried to gain control. And they controlled it for a short period of time. But eventually they lost it. So the Amarna letters are a direct testament historically to what took place in the world at that time. In close examination of this period, we see a decline in the Kemetic influence in Asia. Several hundred years later, you see the emergence of the great Assyrian Empire that inevitably conquers Kemet. The Sun Kings that came forth from Napata to fight the Assyrians to gain control of Kemet. They controlled it for about 50 to 100 years until the Assyrians regrouped and came back a second time. This time they came back more viciously and they plundered the great temple of the Ipet Iset, or the Karnak temple, and set fire to it and took back to Assyria treasures from the temple, most notably the Tekhens, or some of the Tekhens that were within the temple, and they took it back to Assyria or to Iraq. All this begins with the emergence of these great nations in Asia. But had Akhenaten perhaps, if he would have answered these pleas for help in Asia Assyria may have never come along. We got to ask ourselves that question. If Assyria, Babylon, and Persia would have ever emerged as these great nations as we know them today, if Akhenaten ever answered those pleas for help. Subsequently, each of those nations now become invaders of ancient Kemet. In that order: Assyria, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, Persia under Cyrus and Darius. All these nations become invaders of ancient Kemet. As the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians invaded Egypt, one of the things that they always did was they always took back with them objects of affection, things that they were romantically in love with ancient Kemet with. One of these objects is the Tekhen itself and what it represents. The reemergence of life, the resurrection of life. How are these things connected to who we are as a people, who we are as man, as humankind, our very being itself? How once something dies, it resurrects itself and it becomes life once again. This is one of the keys of the Tekhen. In each nation, or each foundation of the nation, wanted to have a connection to this. We see this not only in the ancient civilizations of Assyria and Persia and Babylon, but you also see this with Greece and Rome.
After the Persian invasion of the Nile in 525 BC, the Greeks were invited in as mercenary soldiers to aid the Persians. And that allowed them to have access to this flowering civilization, which had existed for 4,000 to 5,000 years before. Previously to that, Greeks were allowed into the Nile to study or to learn. But after 525 BC, they came in as part of a mercenary army. And they were able to take from that culture of the Nile and take it back to Greece. So the great period of Greek flowering is 500 BC to 300 BC. And what was the significant thing that happened at that time? The relationship of Greece to the Nile Valley. So we need to go into these things. We need to study it. There was not much in Greek's development before 500 BC. The Great Golden Age, the age of Pericles, is that period between 500 and 300 BC. And that's the period we reference Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, etc. All of them looked to the Nile in the south and looked to the east, Mesopotamia, for the light that helped them raise up Greek civilization. But the interesting thing about the Europeans is that they refused to accept an African southern origin of Nile Valley civilization or the impact of an Afro-Asian civilization in the east in Mesopotamia. They want to claim that Greek is the result of a miracle that came from the north, from the Aryan peoples of the north, the Nordic peoples of the north. And there's no way that that historical connection can be made without substantial lies and contradictions.
The Romans were fanatically in love with the Tekhen. Not only did they take back several Tekhen new from Kemet, they erected Tekhens of their own. And they placed them all throughout Rome.
In fact, in Rome, there's 33 Tekhens. In Egypt today, there's only 13 still left. So there's more in Italy than in Africa. We have one in Central Park.
It took them 2 weeks to bring that up from Lower Manhattan and to move it through the streets and put it in Central Park.
And the twin to that is in London.
They're in Paris, in the Place de Concorde, at the foot of the Champs-Élysées.
You have them in Turkey, Istanbul.
Or they're in the Holy See in Rome, in St. Peter's Square, has this African symbol of resurrection. Near the British Parliament, there's another one.
Why does everybody want this?
If these cultures out of the Nile are pagan cultures. Why would one want to replicate them or copy them like the Washington Monument? Or why would one take one whole, these weighing tons and tons, and bring it out of the Nile, across the Mediterranean, up the Italian peninsula, and then flop it in the middle of your holy square, and then put a cross on the top of it?
The spiritual power to be resurrected, to be reborn, to be able to tap into their nature consciousness.
And why would Napoleon and others not be satisfied until they went to the Nile Valley with their great armies in 1799? Armies and navy went for the conquest of the Nile. But leading them at the head of the armies was 150 professors and scholars, archaeologists, because they knew they were going to the fount of learning, and they wanted to make sure they got that knowledge and brought it back to France.
They got to draw from the greatness of ancient Kemet, because they can't draw necessarily from the greatness of Europe. Europe is in chaos at this point.
So you see here that the love or affection for ancient Kemet goes back deeper to anything we could possibly, I think, understand today. But one of the things we have to note or make mention of is this. When the conquerors of ancient Egypt came to Kemet, they in fact themselves became what we refer to as Egyptized. These people adored Egyptian culture to the point where they wanted to be Kemetiu. They wanted to understand how these people were able to do the things that they did. They marveled with Egypt in ancient times. As we marvel with Kemet today, they marveled with Egypt or Kemet in those times as well. We look at Alexander the Great, as he's called, and his conquering of the Persian Empire, which Kemet encompassed at that time. One of the first places he went when he came to Egypt was the oracles of Amen at a place called Siwa in northern Kemet, where he declared himself a pharaoh. He's just an example of many that came to ancient Kemet and endured the dress of the Kemetiu. In fact, the Hyksos did the same thing. They put their names in what they refer to today as cartouches. We call them shens, which is only for the royalty. They put their names in there, and they adored the dress of the Kemetiu. They erected temples to the Egyptian principles. So did the Greeks, so did the Romans, so did the Persians. They erected temples to the Egyptian principles. We call them principles because these are the principles of the laws of nature. These are principles of life. These are the principles of the universe. Some people call them gods. They're deeper than gods. They're principles. They're the things which keep the universe together. They're the very elements for our existence. In Genesis, it refers to the pluralization of the Creator, where it says, "Let us create man in our image." That is mistranslated by some people as the Trinity. If you look in the Hebrew, it refers to something called Elohim. El is God as a singular. The Ohim is the pluralization of God. The same thing can be said in Islam by the Allahumma. Allah, in this sense, is creator. The Allahumma is the pluralization of that. Some people say it's the law and the attributes. Some people say it's the law, Allah and the 99 plus 1 names, which are all a part of this pluralization of the Creator. So we talk about the principles of life. We're talking about God in a plural sense, not in a plural sense as different creators, as a plural sense as one creator. The ancient Kemetiu were not polytheistic. It was a monotheistic society, if you want to call it that. But they understood that within that single, there were many fundamental principles that had to be understood.
In the great city of Waset,